Hi, I'm Adam Fiveson. I have a child with autism, and I was a teacher for 6 years in a high school where many of my kids were on the spectrum. So I'm talking to you today about autism because it's a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. As future parents, you may be reluctant to have your child diagnosed with autism and even more afraid to take the steps necessary to tackle this challenge with today's youth. What's more troubling is while there is not yet a cure for autism, there are very effective treatment methods, and many parents are hesitant or reluctant to have their children detected and treated. And so I'm here today to urge you to get those early detections and to treat your child as soon as possible. The first question is easy. What is autism? Autism is a combination of four major traits. One is social challenges. Your child is shy. Your child is unable to pick up on social cues. For example, he may not know what's an appropriate time to laugh, or when an appropriate time is to act out or to run around. And of course, children at different ages have different levels of activity, and sometimes they're just so filled with energy that you think, well, geez, maybe my kid's ADHD. You reach a benchmark where your child is supposed to learn how to sit down and pay attention, and he's not, then sometimes that could be an indicator of autism. Another one is communication difficulties. Communication difficulties include being completely nonverbal, as my son was up until the age of about 2.5, to just not necessarily finding a word to go along with whatever he's feeling or whatever he wants to say. Interestingly enough, my son was able to read at a very early age. I'm thinking maybe about 18 months old, my son was able to read, but he was unable to ask for milk. So one level of communication, which was reading and reading out loud and understanding words that he had never seen before, was perfectly capable. But on the other end of the spectrum, just saying "I'm hungry" was hard. So we would have to deal with our child who was crying and understanding what he wanted. And we found out that writing things down to him made it easier for us to communicate with him. Repetitive behaviors, for example, flapping of the arms or stimming or spinning in circles. Spinning in circles, why would a child do that? Well, sometimes they're doing it just to get off that extra energy, and sometimes they're doing it because they need to process the stimulation, the things they're taking in. A lot of noise, for example. Sometimes you'll see young autistic children covering their ears, or they'll be processing information in a way that just seems strange or bizarre to you as a parent. And then, of course, there are some physical and medical issues that sometimes accompany autism. Food refusal, for example. Every kid doesn't want to eat their broccoli, but if you have a child that only eats things that are white or only eats things that are yellow, sometimes that's one of those situations where it's an autistic child and you don't even realize it. Keep in mind, too, that this is a spectrum disorder, so you may or may not have one or all of these elements. Take a look at this chart here and look at the different items that are on this chart, and you'll see how sometimes they overlap. So you may have a child who has social challenges, but maybe doesn't have the communication difficulties that other children have. Maybe they have speech difficulties. These are all things that we have to understand as parents. And like I said, the most important thing is to be willing and open to the diagnosis, because the diagnosis can help your child in the long run. We seek answers for the behaviors for our children. Why is my child acting this way? And sometimes it's impossible to understand in our kids what we're seeing. We desperately want to help them so we can understand how to get them to where they want to be. He's got access now to the types of teachers and the types of things that he needs to help him grow as a child and as a human being. And I have no doubt that my son's going to be successful later in life. One of the best and most accepted treatments for autism is ABA therapy. Now, it's important to understand there is no cure for autism, but there are many, many treatments out there. Most experts, including psychology today, recommend a combination of treatments and therapies depending on your child's behavior and what you're trying to accomplish. So when people tell you there's no cure, don't believe them for a minute. There are cures. There are ways of changing your child's behavior. Applied behavioral analysis is a very well-known of retraining autistic behaviors, but it's highly controversial. It's a very regimented system of behavioral modification. And parents are oftentimes reluctant to submit their children to this kind of training. What it means is that your child has behaviors that may be self-destructive, that may be socially unacceptable. Now, do you want to change those behaviors? If you do want to change those behaviors, ABA therapy may be very effective for you. The problem is are you sublimating your child's real personality? And I guess the fear there is that you are changing your child's behavior to suit the society. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. So ABA is one tool in a parent's educator's toolbox. It is a set of AMA-approved, proven interventions which can be used to teach skills or change behavior. All behaviors can be changed since such positive reinforcement or negative consequences can be used. We use them today. If you don't brush your teeth, we're going to take away your iPad. The question is it structured enough for your child? Who we become is based entirely on the application of reinforcement and consequences from our teachers and our parents. And ABA therapy is simply a way of understanding and modifying and systemizing what should be natural to children. Therapy. People believe that ABA is going to fix their child. And this is particularly true with children who have difficulty with socialization, pragmatic language, and forming emotional bonds. ABA is able to teach social skills, and if the child has the ability, intellectually speaking, they can accomplish quite a bit. But ABA cannot teach emotional experiences. This deficit is what makes ASD so scary for parents, because there's little emotional attachment from the child. And being a parent of an autistic child, I can tell you that I see my child every single day learning how to be emotionally attached. And sometimes it's scary because he doesn't want to hold on to his teddy bear like other children. But he's learning how to adapt and to show his emotions using ABA therapy, and it's been very effective. We also hear of children who, when they develop language skills, are able to verbalize their experiences and frustrations about not being able to communicate their needs or experiences of having their senses overloaded. But the questions like what are they feeling, or as opposed to what they were taught to say, remains in everyone's mind. Are these children just parroting what they're expected to say, or do they have these emotions, and are they truly feeling them? That's really a matter of time being able to tell. So what is stimming? We've all heard about stimming, right? You've seen the child shake and rock back and forth. Stimming is a way for a child to regulate and process the information that a child is receiving. Think of it as a regulator or like a governor for someone who is in sensory overload. As long as the behavior is non-destructive, stimming is a healthy way for your autistic child to process his or her feelings. So stimming should not be stopped unless it's self-destructive. But we don't want it to become a crutch. In conclusion, we promote ABA for children. It is often based on scientific evidence. However, parents, especially parents of young children, may not be convinced by the science alone. There is more scientific evidence demonstrating ABA works than there are for any other intervention or treatment. But what's more important than a scientific argument? The argument of parents themselves. My child was unresponsive. My child was nonverbal. My child was only able to read but not able to speak. And today, my child functions in a gifted program. He has an IQ of 138. He is 6 years old, and he's a joy to be around. Does he still display autistic behaviors? Does he still go into meltdown on occasion? Sure. He is autistic, and there's no getting around that. But I have great hope for my child because of ABA therapy. And having a label of autism is something that will give him benefits in the future and not hold him back. I want to thank you for paying attention to me today and listening to my persuasive argument. I feel that you are the first line of defense. You are the one that is to tell that parent or future parent, the brother, the sister on the spectrum, or even people you know someone who has got ASD, you're the first person to say, hey, you know what, this ABA therapy might be the best thing for you. Be prepared to meet resistance. I know I have. I've spoken to parents about this, and I've been told to mind my own business or not my child. And you know what? You have to get past that. You have to accept the idea that sometimes you're going to be pushed back. But ultimately, you are the ones that are going to make sure that the child deserves to get what he or she is capable of. Every child deserves to learn all that he can, and it's up to us to make sure that our children get what they deserve. We promote ABA for children. It is often based on scientific evidence. However, parents, especially parents of young children, may not be convinced by the science alone. So in closing, I want to give you 10 great reasons why children deserve ABA therapy. Number one, there is more scientific evidence demonstrating ABA works than there are for any other intervention or treatment. But what's more important than a scientific argument? The argument of parents themselves. My child was unresponsive. My child was nonverbal. My child was only able to read but not able to speak. And today, my child functions in a gifted program. He has an IQ of 138. He is 6 years old, and he's a joy to be around. Does he still display autistic behaviors? Does he still go into meltdown on occasion? Sure. He is autistic, and there's no getting around that. But I have great hope for my child because of ABA therapy. And having a label of autism is something that will give him benefits in the future and not hold him back. Number two, kids with autism deserve ABA therapy because they are human beings who want to be social but can't. When I was growing up, an autistic child was basically a retarded child. You couldn't get anywhere. You were labeled. You were considered non-functional. You were lucky if you were to get a job bagging at a grocery store. Now there are entire corporations that are hiring entire divisions that are autistic children, autistic adults. I myself think I'm somewhere on the spectrum because there are certain social issues that I have problems with. One is maintaining eye contact. Children with autism are human beings, and over the years, parents and other kids have treated their autistic neighbors as less than human, and that's critical. Number three, it will help parents be the best parents they can be. I know that growing up, my parents tried very hard to reach me. I was having social issues in school. I was being picked on. I was dealing with bullies in school. I was dealing with any number of things. And I didn't know how to connect with them. I didn't know how to connect with my parents. I didn't understand it. I have kids in school that are on the spectrum, and they didn't get diagnosed until very late. And they struggled with understanding who they are and what they are. And sometimes they said, oh, I can't do that because I'm autistic. Well, those are kids that are using it as a crutch. And I would always say to them, I don't care if you're autistic. You need to do this. You need to get beyond that. And I would push them and push them. And a lot of them came back to me later after they graduated and said, Mr. Five, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten through this program. I wouldn't have gotten through high school. My own son, and I'm not going to pat myself on the back. My wife is mostly responsible for the raising of my son. But my own son has seen so many progressions and so many expansions. He's in Cub Scouts now. He's in brain games. He's in after-school art programs. My son is so engaged. that he knows all of his Cub Scout troop. He knows their names. He knows things about them. These are things you would never see from an autistic child. And I think it's important to note here that autistic children, there are so many different flavors of autism there are so many different flavors of autism that it's almost impossible to label them all. All I can say to you is that there's an old saying, if you know one alcoholic, you know them all. But if you know one kid with autism, you know one kid with autism. Each one has a different place on that spectrum. And understanding what works for them is different for each child. Number 4, it'll teach them how to sleep through the night and use the bathroom. Potty issues are big with autistic children. Sometimes it's because they don't feel it. I'm still struggling with that for my son right now. Sometimes they don't necessarily feel that they have to go, so we have to remind them and provide them with consequences and rewards. And that's what ABA therapy is. ABA therapy is a system of consequences and rewards. Think of it as bribing your child, but it's not quite that simple. It's more of a structured thing where all parents and teachers and caregivers and grandparents all work from the same playbook. That's where it's different from regular parenting. And a lot of times it goes against the grain. You know, I would never say to my son, if he was typical, if you do this, I will give you this. And if you don't do this, I will take away that. Normally, I would say, you know what, you want to make me proud. And I would use feelings like pride and feelings of pride and feelings of disappointment and guilt. Well, none of those strategies work with an autistic child. So being the best parent I can be means that I know what strategies work with my child. I have a really fantastic toolbox that will help me through it. And my child gets to sleep through the night, which is really important because autistic children have sleep issues. Number 5, it is the best defense against the tyranny of low expectations. Autism is one of those things where parents and children and schools say, well, he can't do this because he's autistic. No. Understanding what your child does, understanding how they function, and understanding what makes them tick is a critical thing when you're raising a child. And my hope is that understanding ABA therapy will give you a tool that will give you the ability to raise the expectations of your child and get them into those gifted programs like my son. Number 6, it'll teach them the skills necessary to make friends. You know, my son was raised in an environment where he was encouraged to make friends, but he never seemed to be able to make that connection. To this day, I go into work every single day and I'm unsure of my relationship with my coworkers, even though they say they love me. And my son is experiencing similar things. He wants to make friends very desperately, but he doesn't quite know how. ABA therapy provides them with a roadmap to making friends. And what could be more important than having social skills and understanding how to connect with people on that most basic of levels? Number 7, it enables parents and teachers to capitalize on their child's strengths. Not every kid has some supreme ability to be an art aficionado, although autistic children do occasionally come out with some amazing savant-like skills. We're still discussing and determining what my child's skills are, and we're finding every single day that he has abilities that we never knew about. For me, it was becoming a visual communicator. That was my autistic skill, my savant-like skill. I'm not great at these social interactions we're doing here today, but I am good at visually creating a message. My son is amazing at reading and writing and math, and hopefully that becomes his savant-like skills, because then we'll all be working for him someday. But if not, he's going to find his skills. He's going to find his state of grace. And I define a state of grace as that thing that makes you better than the sum of your parts. Number 8, it can teach parents how to respond in the moment. I remember one time we were in a grocery store and my son wanted something desperately. And he threw himself down on the floor and it was in a tantrum. And we've all seen situations like this where a parent watches his child in the middle of a grocery store or a bank, and the child throws himself on the floor and starts screaming hysterically. And a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just take that child outside and beat them? Or why don't you take that child and provide him with discipline? And the answer is different for every parent, and the answer is different for every child. And sometimes discipline is necessary, but how to respond in the moment to that child and be able to determine whether or not what you're dealing with is a meltdown or a tantrum is really essential. And a meltdown, by the way, is what an autistic child will do. They'll throw themselves on the floor. It looks like a tantrum, except they're not looking for a response from the parent. Sometimes even giving in to the child doesn't stop the tantrum. Sometimes the child is not looking, and that's one thing you can do as a bystander, is you can look and see if the child is looking to their parents for a response. If the parent is not getting that feedback from the child, then you know that child is dealing with a meltdown and not a tantrum. So being able to deal with those meltdowns and understanding what to do is essential, and it's an important part of ABA therapy. It's one of those two major critical elements of ABA therapy that if you follow these precepts, you can use as an effective strategy. Number 9. This was the one that touched me the most. Someday the parents are going to die. This is the one that touched me the most. My son was born when I was in my early 40s. I'm 45 today, and my wife is in her 40s. And I was 400 pounds when my son was born. And I had to make some serious lifestyle choices and life decisions because I wanted to be there for my son when he grew up. Because knowing that my son was autistic, I knew that my son was going to need someone there to advocate for them. ABA therapy provides an ability to change the behaviors that are destructive or self-destructive. Could you imagine having a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 12-year-old who's completely nonverbal? If it wasn't for ABA therapy, my son would not be able to speak to me. He wouldn't be able to speak to caregivers. And if I died tomorrow, I would want to know that my son was in good hands, that my son could tell someone what he needs. That's really the most important part about ABA therapy, and I think it's the most compelling argument there is. Number 10, it can prepare them to be their own best advocates. Just like number 9, I want my child to be able to tell people what he needs. And ABA therapy allows him to do that. It gives him the toolbox so that after I pass on and after my wife passes on, my son will be able to have the tools necessary to be a responsible adult someday. I believe every child deserves a chance to show others all that he or she is capable of. Every child deserves to learn all that he can, and it's up to us to make sure that our children get what they deserve. I urge you, if you're a parent, if you're a caregiver, if you're going to have children someday, I urge you not to hesitate. Get your child diagnosed as soon as possible. Fight for your child. Be your child's best advocate. And number 1, there is no known cause of autism. If you believe that autism is caused by vaccinations, you're wrong. If you believe that autism is caused by an allergy to gluten, you're wrong. These things may exacerbate an already existing condition, but I knew my child was autistic the day I laid eyes on him. When I looked at him, I nibbled on his ear to connect with him, and he didn't look me in the eyes. My 2 older daughters, they looked me in the eyes when I did that. They were looking at me as if to say, what are you doing? My son didn't look at me. And from that moment, I looked at my wife and I said, we have something to deal with. We have a problem here. and I knew it. And it took us about 2 years to get the diagnosis. It took he was meeting those benchmarks until he was about 6 months old, and then he started to slow down on the communication benchmarks, and he started to go backwards on his communication skills and his social skills. And we realized that we had an issue, and he was first diagnosed with PDD, and then when he was 2, he was diagnosed with autism. But between the ages of 18 months to 2 years old, we had the therapies in place. We went to the various programs. And down below, you're going to see some websites that I want you to go to. If you think your child has autism, or if you think your child is experiencing a pervasive developmental delay, I urge you strongly to look at the links below and get the help you need. The March of Dimes is very, very involved with these programs, and I suggest very strongly you look into it. Autism is not a death sentence. It doesn't mean your child can't survive. In fact, it means your child can thrive if you catch it early enough, and if you put in the correct procedures. If you take the correct steps, you can do a lot with a child with autism. If you're a parent or a future parent, if you have a brother or a sister on the spectrum, or even people who know someone with autism, this speech is for you. I want you to be aware of autism. I want you to try to suggest early intervention. ABA therapy is simply a method of training your child. And if I had known about this as my other kids were growing up, I think I might have used it with them. My son has responded in such a way that it's amazing. It lifts me up. Getting to know my child now has really, really made everything worthwhile. And while I still fear for his future, I also know that he's got a success ahead of him and that he's going to reach his state of grace. I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to let you know that I appreciate you spending the time with me and listening about ABA therapy. I want you to look at those links below, and I would like you to take this with the seriousness it deserves.